Mark Hatfield is joining us. We are into episode 17.
Amazing.
I know, living your life with Leanne Lang. So welcome to the show. Just want to mention, of course, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And for more information, you can always head to extensionmarketing.com. I've got comedian, I've got former CFLer, NFLer, firefighter, dad, motivational speaker. This is going to be a fun one. And I think this is really special for me because a couple months ago, about 6 months ago, actually. A couple of days after I left CTV Morning Live, I was your guest.
Yes.
On the Hatfield Trip.
Which was a huge moment for my podcast as well, because after you were on, it was so topical, it was so fresh. The people of the city wanted to hear from you again that my listeners like doubled at that point, and a lot of them have stayed. So it was huge for me. Then Melissa was on right after that. And it was a huge moment for my podcast, and I mean, just the conversation we had and getting to know you a little better, it was great, and I loved every minute of it. And our podcast has changed because of that too.
That's really cool. I had no idea, and it was a big learning curve for me because I had in my head wanted to do something like that, and it was kind of in my wish list of things I wanted to do when I was leaving. But to have had that experience with you and to have the understanding of what a podcast is really like and the flow, because we chatted for like an hour and 15 minutes, and it was really free flowing, and I was like, this is what I've been wanting to do for so long.
Isn't it so awesome?
It really is, and you get to know things and people, and just the stories. I think you always make a point, but when there's a story to be told behind it, it's really neat.
Yeah, it's all about hearing someone's story, and the environment you came from before, where everything had to be in 4-minute segments and approved by somebody else. It's not really you, first of all, and it's not really them. But then when that happens and you go through 5 minutes of conversation, and then you're like, okay, well, now what? We got to tell the truth, right? Like, the truth eventually comes out. And some people even believe like an hour long isn't even enough. For me, it's enough for upload reasons too, but just time of day, I'm not going to disturb someone for more than an hour of their day or whatever. But to speak and to have a conversation with somebody for a length of time that is up to you is what it's really all about. And after I do a podcast, I just feel so much different. I feel like I've learned something. I feel like I've been through something. And even it's not just because you have the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody. It's because you have a sit down and there's no distractions, and you're having this one-on-one. And I really, it's one of the favorite things that I do or I ever have done. And if I had 10 listeners, I think I would continue to do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
you get that much joy.
I get so much fun out of it. It used to be when I first started, it was all about how many people are listening. Is it worth doing? And now I don't even check. You asked me the other day how many, what the listeners are at, and I'm like, I honestly haven't checked in like 2 months. I just go about, booking the guest, having the conversation and the upload. I put more into the sort of the creative, the artwork behind it. And I just love doing it so much, and I look forward to it every week, and I can't wait to, like, it's just so exciting for me to have a conversation with this person. Like I listen to other people and they talk about, the benefits of podcasting, and one thing is it increases your circle of friends or, people you have a relationship with, and it's so true. Like, I have all these great friends now that, like, I can...
But you've had a deep conversation with them.
Yeah.
It's gone beyond the, hey, how you doing? Hey.
I'm goosebumps. I'm all excited just because we're having this conversation, and I'm thinking about people I've met. I'm thinking about, our conversation, and it changes your life. It's just like...
And but the idea behind yours, though, you're going to come out of yours feeling uplifted, because what were you hoping to create? Like, what's the premise behind yours?
Yeah, so mine is about my life, and I started about 8 years ago going to schools and speaking about the obstacles I had to overcome, and goal setting, and really having a life that's just wake up every single day and point yourself in a certain direction. And so I would go out and I would give all this energy in a school and speak to 800 people, and it would take someone booking it, it would take me going there and then doing it. And now I feel like I've done it so much that it's time to start hearing other people's stories. And I know everybody has a story. I've been in rooms where there's people trying to, teach you to be a motivational speaker. And then you go around and you go, as long as someone has 10 minutes to think about something, they go, oh man, that's how long it took me to come up with my story. I was in a room with the STEAM team in 19.
Just go through that. What is a STEAM team?
The STEAM team is a group of athletes, professional athletes, Olympic athletes that are right across Canada that go to schools and speak to kids about goal setting primarily, and they tell their story so kids can see themselves in those stories and realize that everyone struggles, everyone has a hard time. and it's about overcoming obstacles and setting your goals. And Mark Sluban saw me on I guess it was called 8 Channel at the time, on the morning show with Kurt and someone else, can't remember. And I was doing my exercise business, and he's like, "Well, you've got an interesting story. Yeah, what is it?" And I went, "Well, here it is." Like, because he was so actually interested into it, because he was a fan of, like, professional football and the Houston Oilers, and he knew a little bit more than most people do when they ask the questions. I'm like, "Well, yeah, and here's my story." And then so Mark Sluban saw that on TV, and I went into this training session, and it went around the room, and there was like Olympic athletes and people who'd been telling their stories for years, and they went around. I got like 3 hours to come up with my story while also listening to these people, and just kind of when I got a moment, I would jot something down, and it came my turn, and I went, "Oh my God, this story is incredible!" Like, it all came back to me, and people in the room were crying and laughing, and it just went so well that they booked me to start speaking 2 weeks later, and I've done like over 800 speeches since then. God. And back to the original question is that in that moment when I realized I have a story that's worth telling to other people, I realized everybody has one of those stories. And people are interested in those stories, and I wanted to hear them. First of all, I want to hear them. I want to have that conversation and hear these stories from the people, and I know everybody else does, right? And I get this feedback from every single podcast is, "Wow, like that moment, I had no idea about that person," or "That was an amazing, that person's story, and how they overcame that is just incredible." And just hearing someone else to have that same struggle, it really helped me out. And it's I realized that it helps people a lot. And it's something that I'm really interested in, for sure.
Okay, so I know your story, but I think I'd like to know how you, as you're sitting there and have 3 hours to create this, and you're jotting down notes.
Yep.
Your story resonates with a lot of people because it's about being told that you can't. And then, and how many of us have heard no,
Right.
And then finally had an opportunity to prove people wrong. And I think that resonates with so many people because once they hear the no once or twice, they tend to kind of turn around and walk away defeated, nature, right?
For sure.
And not many of us have the capacity to say, "I'm going to figure out a way to make it a yes." And I think that's why it's been so successful and why there's been such a reach for your story. So can we go back? It's funny. Like I knew you as the Bishop guy because of my husband.
That's
Tony
right.
Tony would always be like, "Yeah, I think he painted. He kind of did a."
Who's one of the awesomest guys you'll ever meet. For people who have never met her husband, Tony Harris, he is the funniest guy. He is such a nice guy, athletic guy. He's like the perfect man. If you weren't married to him, I would be. I love Tony Harris.
I find it interesting, and people ask me because there's such an athletic side to him, right?
Yeah.
Like he played junior hockey, quarterback of the, like all-star
All
quarterback,
Canadian
like
quarterback,
pretty much was a scratch golfer before we had kids,
Yeah.
And then has this crazy artistic side. Like it's a really crazy dynamic.
Yeah. And so modest, you'd never know it, right? Like, I mean, maybe,
No, I don't. I look at him.
Had a T-shirt with all his stats on it when he met you. I don't know.
You know what he had on? He had a T-shirt that said "BU."
Okay.
And I had a T-shirt that said UMass. And we met because we were sitting next to each other at the gym. I don't think I've told this story. We met sitting at the gym at Good Life.
Yeah.
He was living in Montreal, was visiting his friend Eric Gauthier, who played football at Bishops. And I was like, "Hey, did you go to BU?" And he goes, "I did, but you're probably thinking I went to Boston based on the fact that you probably went to UMass."
Yeah.
We struck up a conversation. It was like 3 minutes. And then his friend, who, when you see the same people all the time at the gym or wherever, you've never met them, but you just know that you've seen them for years. And about 3 months later, that friend came up to me and said, "Hey, about 3 months ago, you were talking to a friend of mine. You talked for a couple minutes about BU and UMass. And he said if I ever saw you again, that he would drive in from Montreal to take you out for dinner." And I totally remembered the and so he came in, and we knew we were getting married. We both had the exact same moment. We both knew that was it. Anyway, it's a really cool story. But and so there's a really strong connection with Bishops, and that's where he met you. Yep. But that's kind of where your story starts. But I'm sure it starts long before that.
Yeah, that's near the end of that story.
I'm like, that's the football side of things of where we went to. So kind of take us back a little bit. Like what were you like as a kid? Like, what was it that kind of launched you into a very athletic side of your life?
Well, always interested in sports. Excuse me. Take a little drink of water.
He's all verklempt over my my romance story, right?
I know, because Tony and I have this very similar story. He took me out to dinner, and We went on the Titanic, and he drew a picture of me. It was beautiful.
It was probably really
time.
yeah. It was probably a really good picture though. Yeah.
It was a good picture. Yeah. So my story starts, and I'll give you the sort of the elevator version, not the 45-minute version. It's a 1985, a long time ago. It's a relationship about brothers, about me and my big brother Bill. And on January 22nd of that year, we sat down to watch. I'd only played 1 year of football up to this point at Gloucester High School.
Okay, you're 85.
85, so I'm 15 years old. So yeah, obviously different time. 15-year-old now I look at it as very older, like an adult almost, because they have the internet, and back then, so I think of myself in this story as younger than 15, but I was 15. And so we sat down to watch the Super Bowl, on the little tiny TV in Mom's living room, where you gotta be careful of everything. I still remember the screen couch, and we had a popcorn, and we were watching it, and Dan Marino was playing for the Dolphins, and halfway through the game, my big brother turns to me and he goes, "You know what?" And he'd also bought me a Dan Marino jersey that year for Christmas. So it was really cool that we had this moment together, because we were...
Were you wearing the Dan Marino jersey?
I believe so,
okay,
yeah. That's
watching?
in my head. I was,
okay.
for sure. And he says, "You know what? Dan Marino is only in his second season in the NFL. He's taken his team to the biggest game. He's setting all kinds of records. Dan Marino's breaking all kinds of records that year." And he turns to me and goes, "You know what, Mark? You could play in the NFL someday." And it was like a crazy dream, and it was awesome.
Was this based on your size? I mean,
yeah.
like you're 6'6".
Yeah,
I should mention that. So what were you at 15?
I was very skinny. But my brother always thinks of me as like an athletic guy, and he's my brother was born with a hole in his heart, so he loved sports, but he could never participate in sports because the doctors told him that he couldn't. And at the time, it was an inoperable medical problem, and nowadays apparently there's a surgery to fix it really quickly for inch kids, and it happens quite often that surgery takes place. But at the time, I mean, let's put a baboon heart in him, and he was going off to Toronto and all this stuff. And as his brother, I never really realized anything, about that, other than that he's my brother, because everything seemed normal. But he was also quite a bit smaller than me, so he wasn't as athletic, and he didn't participate in sports. So it was always through me. He was like, "Yeah, let's do this. That's great." No one's ever asked that question before. And it was definitely him living through the extension of me. He was always like, "You should do this, you should do that," right? And so that's what we did. We went out and we practiced football all by ourselves, and we would play catch.
So he was able to he couldn't play at a level, like he couldn't go and play a game, but he was able to kind of still go low key, kind of be able to toss the ball and do all that.
Brothers.
Okay.
We would fist fight and throw each other around, literally try and kill each other when we were upset at each other. Brother stuff for sure. Then there's no holding back on my part. And so we did that, like for weeks and days. And the next season, football came around, and things went well. And that's actually at the end of that season. It was after our last game. We had just lost in the playoffs to South Carlton. Obviously, I'll never forget this day. It was October 30th, 1985, and I walked into the change room, and, in life sometimes you just know something's happened, something's different, everyone's looking at you kind of weird, and I just kind of blew it off as though, it's the end of the season, and my uncle was standing there, and he walks over to me, and, I'm taking off my football equipment, and I'm still trying to catch my breath. I'm still got the emotions of losing this football game. And then he just takes me by the arm and he says, "Mark, I'm sorry, your big brother Bill died today." And like I said, he lived every day like it could be his last. And he was such a great example for me. And as a young person, I didn't know how to handle the situation. And I just kind of went in.
So you're 16, so it was the following year?
It was the same year, 85, but it was the October 30th of that year.
So you're still 15.
15 years old.
And how old was he?
He was 19 years old. He was 19 years old, so just about to become an adult, the whole bit. And years later, my parents were like, "Wow, we thought that since he got to be 19, things would be all right, and he would live like a normal life." And as a kid, I never realized that this medical condition he had could take his life. I knew he had to go to the hospital all the time and all that kind of stuff, but I never clued in. Maybe I just didn't want to, but I just never thought that this could be the end.
So it's different for a child when they realize there's an illness and a sickness. If there's a cancer, like I think there's a better understanding now. But when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123 of understanding the consequences of being sick, but you didn't have that.
No.
So I'm just thinking, like, there's less of a shock when someone comes to you and says they've lost their battle or it's not going well. Like, this hadn't been part of your mindset.
No, zero.
At all.
Zero.
That there was a possibility of it.
No, never considered it, for sure. And then, like, you know, the whole thing was like your head's spinning, and everyone's lost somebody, and we all go through
Not
that.
often at 15
No,
years
that's
old,
yeah.
right?
As a 15-year-old, it was unbelievable. It was something that you never want your kids to go through, obviously, and it's just it was a terrible experience, and I was definitely not prepared for it. Didn't know how to handle it, and seeing my parents go through that at the same time was, I can still see, like, the first time I saw my dad after that, and he was just like this grown man who was, he was standing there crying, and it was just a terrible experience. And I don't often talk about that part of it. And it's funny because I couldn't talk about this for years, decades afterwards, and it was only through going to schools and speaking of it that I could actually tell it when I saw that it had a value to other people, that the legacy of my brother's life could be continued on and people could be motivated and inspired by it, was when I could talk about it. And when I veer off, and I think about that moment when I first saw my father and my mother afterwards, and they were crying, and they just lost their child. It hits me again, and I get pretty emotional about it, for sure. It's terrible. It's funny because my uncle then took me to Chio, where my brother had passed away that day, and so anytime I take my kids to Chio for like a scrape or anything, I go through that again. And I remember the walk up, and like, what's happening here, and then walking into the room and seeing my parents, and and their reaction, and it was terrible. So at that point, I realized there's a couple things I could do here, and I had to sit down, and I wasn't a great writer of things. I didn't have a diary at the time, but I just started writing. And I knew that this was making me feel better. So I sat down, and I could hear everyone downstairs, like family, relatives coming over, and them talking it out, and I could feel them sort of dealing with the situation through conversation. And I didn't feel I could do that. Anytime I opened my mouth, I would cry. I couldn't even be in the same room. So I went upstairs, and I got a paper and a pen, and I just started writing like a letter to him. And that's sort of what got me through. I just kept writing, and I kept writing that, the stuff we had been working on and talking about, I would continue to do, and that, the legacy of his life, and that it wouldn't be of me just giving up and quitting and being the kid who sort of hides about this, but I would take it and I would make it the reason why I achieved these things. And it would be the motivator. And I wrote down a bunch of things that, brothers talk about, and it was professional football, and I was like, yeah, someday I'm going to play in the NFL, and I'm just not going to stop trying. You're going to be proud of me. Now I'm going to get emotional again, but and I rolled it up, and he was buried with it. And
so I was going to ask you, like, what do you do with that letter?
Yeah, I took it, and I wrapped it up with this little bracelet that he had made me that summer at camp, and my parents were like, do you guys want to put anything in with them? And my sister had something, and it was like her necklace, and then I put that in, yeah. So
did your parents ever ask? Like,
no, nobody's ever asked about that, for sure. No, it was your own little thing, and I guess they knew I was upstairs writing something, and maybe they realized that was the letter I wrote to him, and that's what sort of got me through it, for sure. Otherwise, I don't know as a kid how I would have handled that situation. And then,
because you didn't have your brother, who you normally would have relied on.
Yeah,
it seems like that would have been that person that you would have gone to for anything you had helped
for sure.
deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we were 4.5 years difference, but he was clearly my big brother, and he was always there for me. And I still remember saying goodbye to him the last time. It was through a screen door, and my mom was taking him to Chio because he wasn't feeling well. And I remember her saying, he's not coming back until he's better. I'm like, oh, that sounds good to me. Okay, make him better. And so I remember he turned, and he said, goodbye, Mark. And I said, bye. And that was the last time I saw him. But that vision and then the promise that I had made is what carried me through the next 10 years. I was, like I said, I was tall, skinny kid, and not necessarily like an all-star at sports and football, but I knew in my head that I could be that. I knew that if I just never stopped trying at something, that it was possible. And that was what I was holding on to, and this message, this promise that I had made. And I just went out every single day, and I tried my hardest. And the next 10 years were filled with injuries and people telling me I couldn't do it. And then my last year in high school, I'm like, here, I got to get scholarship offers or at least someone interested in me going there to play. And nobody was interested. Nobody cared about me. And so I had to go back another year to high school, and I just kept trying. And then that year I got like literally maybe 3 letters from universities. 2 of them were just like form letters to like, every graduating person. And then one was from Bishop's University, which is where Tony and I met. And the head coach there, Ian Breck, who'd just come to one of my games, and he'd seen this tall, so I was a bit bigger then, but still skinny, like 6'6", the same height, 210, 220 pounds. And he'd seen this person who just on the football field wouldn't give up. He played offense and defense and special teams. And it's strangely enough, but my mom and my sister sat behind Ian Breck at that game because he was all dolled out in the Bishop stuff and just cheered. And you could see that.
Gosh, that guy. Yeah. What number were you?
I don't know at the time, but I do know afterwards. I always wore the number 66 because that was the year my brother was born. And he saw I had family support, and then this guy who would just never give up on anything, and he showed an interest in me. And he started calling me at high school, make sure I got my marks up and my grades up. And I went there, and it was a school where nobody had ever gone on to play in the NFL before. And, people had even said, it's just too small a school. People from there don't go on to play in the NFL. And it was all I had. It was my only hope. And at this point, I was still living in that letter. I was still not really telling people what I wanted to do.
I was going to say, at what point had you kind of said to your parents, listen, I've made this kind of commitment or this promise or this goal, and I'm not going to give up until it's done. Like, they didn't know in that letter wrapped and buried with your brother was that commitment. No.
And that's the thing I teach young people about, and all age people about, is how important it is to tell people about what your dreams are. Because at that point, I was just too worried of failure. I was too worried of letting down my brother. I was too worried about not being able to make that happen because it was so far from what the reality of it happening. I was the only one who believed in it. And when I started telling people that this was my goal, and I started acting that way, they were like, what are you doing? We're fast forwarding a little bit here. And they were saying, what are you doing? And I'm going to go play for and I'd pick a team. I'd actually be so specific about what I was going to be doing in the future. I'm going to play for the New York Giants. I'm going to be doing, and people would just kind of look at me and they would see this guy who said it so confidently and who clearly worked out every day, all day long, and talked about football all day long and watched football all day long, that it's hard to deny that. If it's hard to deny when someone is chasing a dream and they're so passionate about it and they spend most of their time doing it, what you're going to find is people, instead of doubting you, instead of saying you can't do it, is you're going to find people and the world moving in the direction of you achieving your dreams and your goals. It's unbelievable how many people actually want to help people who are passionate about something and who have a goal and a dream.
Is it the positivity? Is it, I'm a big thing on, if you get it, your way of thinking is essential as to what their end result is going to be.
Yes, absolutely, for sure, 100%. If you're thinking in that direction, everything is starting to move in that direction, and it's gonna help you make your decisions, and it's gonna help everything around you. It's unbelievable when you're around someone just for a few moments and you're passionate and you're positive. That continues on in their life, and they think that way of you, and they move in that direction. And next thing is, who do I want to do this? I call that person, right? Like, it's contagious, right? When you start to be a certain way. And that's how it worked. And I noticed it because for years and years and years, I held this dream inside me and I didn't tell anyone about it, and nobody cared to help me. Like, if I had said something about it earlier on, I guarantee you coaches would have been helping me out a little bit more. Not that they weren't, but like, a coach has a whole team to worry about, right? And they're not going to pick out an individual.
They're not thinking this kid made a commitment at 15.
That's right. Absolutely. And I did have coaches who would take me aside, Jeff Hamlin at Gloucester High School, who would take me aside and say things like, because I played basketball and football, and he was like, and this is an ironic story, because I was in grade maybe 11, and he said to me, he showed me a newspaper article, and he goes, listen, this is the guy from Canada who's gone on to play football at Brigham Young University, and now he's won the Outland Trophy as the best down lineman in the country. His name is Moa Wanibi. And it's a great opportunity for you to realize that Canadians can go and do this sort of thing and play that position like an offensive lineman and make it to the NFL. And I never told him anything about it. And you meet these people along the way who sort of know more about you than you ever could imagine how. And he was like that. And it's like he had some sort of maybe because he lived a similar life. He had been a professional football player along the way, and he saw it in me without actually the words being exchanged. So years later, I ended up playing with Mo Elwanibi for the BC Lions, which is a bizarre thing for sure. I'm like, oh my God, there's Mo, and we were.
Do you
became
tell
friends.
him this story? Yeah, I mean,
Mo?
yeah.
I probably told him the story for sure when I first met him. And we were buddies. We used to live in the same neighborhood. We would drive to practice together, and I know Mo like really well. So I haven't talked to him since I stopped playing, but yeah, we had a great relationship for sure when we were on the same team. And so to continue the story,
yeah, because now you've already let on that at least you were in the CFL.
Yeah.
But let's go because the story
is still crazy. Yeah, it's still crazy.
Way more to it.
Yeah. So and then I go to Bishop's University, and it's the same sort of thing. I get moved. Actually, I went there as an inside receiver, and 2 days before I got there, I broke my ankle playing basketball. I broke my hand. My third season, so I'm breaking bones. Things aren't going my way.
It's not a healthy, injury-free all-star.
No,
crazy.
It's not how you would imagine it to be, right? It's not that path of, watch this kid. Oh, look at Sidney Crosby. Wayne Gretzky says he's going to be the best ever. Those stories are so rare, so far between. And even Sidney Crosby, who's been anointed from a young age, struggled a lot, right? There's people don't see the struggles; they just see the success. And there was really no success for me. I wanted so bad to be an all-star every year. And you mentioned Tony Harris was an all-Canadian. To me, the thought of being all-Canadian, to get a ring that says all-Canadian would be like an amazing thing. And that never happened to me. And I was never awarded an all-Canadian anything, right? Not even second-team all-Canadian. So,
are you discouraged at this point? Listen, it's not like you're having... and statistically, there are so few players of anything that actually make it to that professional level. Like, are you thinking, okay, it's not like I'm getting to all-star status and then there's going to be scouts that are going to notice me? Like, are you emphasizing academics at this point at all? Is there any, reality check a little? Like, I don't mean, was there any thought to realign your life goals at all so that you could come out of this and have a productive, influential life without it maybe being through football?
Okay, so
was there any thought process?
Yeah, definitely discouraging all the time. Okay. To the point of, doing myself physical harm almost. Every year, thinking I had a good year, they announce the all-star teams, whatever, and you see the guy beside you, you see the guy across from you getting these all-star awards, and not putting in the kind of commitment, and you just get so physically frustrated that you go out and do something ridiculous because you have no other way of handling it. Yeah, definitely. I punched holes in walls and in the dashboard of my car, and just so I can't control myself because this is not working out. I can't figure it out. So everybody experiences those, right? There's no guy who's super positive all the time. And I tried to be positive as much as possible, but emotions just took over, and that's usually the biggest enemy of anybody can be emotions, right? And I would get so emotional, and I just cry and just not know how to handle these situations.
Although I think ego is a big
ego for sure.
Ego, I think, is for a lot of people a massive obstacle.
Huge obstacle.
And what other people think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's your inner voice and what you're telling yourself is who you are really. And but these. Never did I think I would realign. It's funny because you said, realign your goals and aim lower or whatever.
I didn't mean it so, but I'm being realistic.
But never, realistic, but never did I do that. And when I go to schools and I get to the SMART goals and you get to the R and realistic, I'm always like, you know what? Screw the realistic part, right? You know what I mean? Because nowadays, especially where things weren't even on the radar, are happening daily, right? So no, I never stopped believing in myself about the fact that I could do it someday. As long as I knew I had more, it's funny because I took an extra year of high school, an extra year of university. I just knew if I had a place to go and keep trying, I would never stop trying.
Right. But you're getting older, and sometimes age is not a benefit to you when you've taken an extra year. So it's an extra year beating on your body in high school, an extra year of beating on your body in university. You're 2 years older than maybe some of the other guys coming out at the same spot. Yeah. What are you doing? Okay, so I asked you, what did you graduate with?
A Bachelor of Arts in Sociology.
Oh my God.
Took me that long to get that degree.
So five was it 5 years?
Yeah. No, I got my doctorate in medicine. I was there long enough.
You were
to
there a
get
long
that.
time. Okay, yeah.
But no, to get it's funny you say that too, because football is that terrible for your body and grinding. But when I got to where I got to, I was like almost 5 years older than everybody else. Yeah. When American players get to professional football, they're like 20. I was like 25. Also, I played way less football than maybe anyone ever, except for like those Aussie rules football players that come up and are kickers. I got to the NFL Combine, and people and I had no surgeries. I had no surgeries to speak of, and the guy before me had like 21. Literally, he had 21 knee surgeries before, and to them it was like, okay, how's it working now? You know, like it wasn't like, oh, that's terrible. That's just normal. I get up there and there's like no scars, and they're like, have you ever played football? How is this possible? And then they started to calculate like. These guys start playing when they're 5 years old,
right?
And they play then 30 games a year, and it keeps going. In university, they play 30 games a year. We in Canada, you shut her down after 8. There's snow all over the place.
And there's no Friday night lights like goes Texas.
No,
the town, the city is not completely engulfed by football throughout your youth.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the NFL Combine? So how on earth do you end up there? Because it's not like you've got some stellar varsity career and people kind of on top of you.
So I played offensive line. At Bishops, I got moved from inside receiver to defensive line to offensive line. And I had to learn these things. And I've always been a very technical learner. I'd always tried to break things down, which is very beneficial in football. Because football, regardless of what people think about it, people smashing their heads together, it's not. It's so much technique. And that's how you make it, by having... When they judge you after a football game, it's on 3 things. And it's on whether you had success in that play, if you had your body in the right position, and if you... I forget the third thing. That's probably why I'm not there anymore. But... the strong part of it is technique, and if you use the exact technique, and I'm not just saying the right person, it's putting your foot in the right spot, putting your hands in the right spot, keeping your pad level down, like it's all technique. So the good thing was I was trying to learn these things right then and there as an adult, basically, and not a kid. So I wasn't learning bad behavior, bad technique. I had to do it fast, so I had to learn the exact proper technique. And I would watch videos. I would find, go into the coach's office and take out the, Anthony Munoz, who's one of the greatest offensive linemen of all time, videotapes, and I put it in. I would watch it, and here's one of the greatest, teaching me, and those coaches would reinforce it, and so that was a way that I learned quickly in a shorter amount of time than other people, for sure. What was the question? Oh yeah, so we're at Bishops. Yeah, how do you
get to a helmet?
Yeah, and then so I just kept going, and as an offensive lineman, people don't realize whether you're doing well, and they only realize if you're doing poorly. Okay, because if your quarterback's getting sacked, your running back's not running, they start pointing the blame. But if things are going well, it's somebody else that's doing a good job, right? If the quarterback's having a good year, he's having a good year, and the running back's having a good year. It's not the offensive lineman. So we always had good teams. We always had great teams, like number 1 in the country, winning, the OQIFC, the conference, and that sort of stuff. So no fingers ever pointed at the offensive lineman. And and the bigger schools, McGill, that's where the offensive linemen are coming from that are getting recognized. So never did I get any recognition until I went and I started telling people my dream. I went and I told Glenn Constantine, who is just the linebackers coach at Bishops University at the time, who has become the most successful university football coach of all time. He's the head coach at University of Laval. And another point that I like to tell people is if someone takes the time to give you advice, you listen to it no matter who they are or what their position is, because you have no idea like what their life story is and what their goals.
Where he was going to actually end up also, right?
Where his head is for sure. Like this is a guy who is fully committed to helping the people around him, to making everyone better, to make a great situation. And what he's done at Laval University is unheard of. It's unbelievable. It's similar to Carleton basketball. It really is. It's
kind of like what Dave Smart was able to create.
Exactly, yeah. It's an unbelievable environment,
and people in Ottawa will understand this. People also going, what are these universities and who is this? But if you're Ottawa, you realize this program that's been built, it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable, like worldwide unbelievable, right? Like it's crazy. And so Glenn had the time for me, and we sat down. We would talk about football. We would talk about technique. We would talk about what the steps were to get to the next level, like through getting an agent and through talking to people. And he and I sat down. We made videotapes together of like some of my better plays that year, and we would talk about it. And he said, this is great tape. You've had a great season, whether or not anyone says you're an all-star or not. And he goes, I'm going to send this out to some people for you. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That's great. So another thing that I tell people is experts. You got to use experts. You can't do everything on your own. You need help, whatever it is you're trying to do. And so I had to get a sports agent. If I had called these NFL football teams and said, listen, hey, I had a great year, they would have hung up the phone. They wouldn't even answered the phone. Because when I got to Detroit, there was a wall. They would put up a wall of people who tried to contact them on their own, and they would put the pictures and the letters
Really?
up. Yeah, I don't know what the reason for that was, but it was all up in the wall, and it was basically, don't try and do this on your own, right? That's what the message was. I imagine is, right, do it the proper way. We don't want to answer the phone from these people, and so I got a sports agent, and he sent those videotapes around, and teams saw this big, sort of raw person who hadn't played a lot of football, but I was very fast at the time, and athletic, especially for the position I played, and so teams showed interest, and the Houston Oilers invited me to the NFL Combine, which was crazy because nobody from the Canadian University that year anyways had been invited to the NFL Combine. In fact, a lot of good players from American universities didn't get invited to the Combine. So here I was,
Okay, I got to ask you
yeah.
though. So you get this call, your agent calls you and says,
Yep.
you've been invited.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Like, is there an emotional release? Is there saying something to your brother? Is there what goes in? Because I don't think anyone really foresaw that this was even that moment was going to happen. This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
Yeah, no, to other people it was more of a shock. To me, who had been, who was there day in, day out of my life, it was, wow, finally someone has seen this. Finally, I'm getting, the attention that I need. And here's my opportunity. And I always believed in myself. No matter what, I always believed that someday this was going to happen. I think that's really key to anybody who's trying to overcome anything or achieve anything, is on some level, yeah, there's got to be doubt. There's got to be people saying you can't do it. There's got to be you waking up and go, why am I doing this? But at some level, you still have to have a smile in the back of your head and believe that you can do it. And I always believed that something was going to happen and good things were going to start happening. And that to me was like, okay, finally, there's a lot of talk about nowadays about that we live in a simulation. And that's why when you're positive about things, good things happen to you in your simulation. And I look back at that and I think that's sort of what it was. I just believed in myself, and I knew that all these things that weren't going right were what was making me stronger and pushing me in the right direction. And that, believing in myself meant it was going to someday happen. And this was it. This was it happening for sure. It wasn't any guarantee by any means, but it was me and other people finally saying, there's two things that happened at the time that really pushed me over and gave me 100% confidence. I always had the confidence, but first of all was Glenn Constantine, and my original conversation with him and how it started was that it was at a party, and it was at the end of the year, and he said to me without me saying anything, because there'd been some CFL interest in me at that point because I was a Canadian, big, tall offensive lineman, and I did win an All-Star Conference Award. It was one of the only awards I ever won. And he came to me, and people were talking about the CFL to me, whatever, and asking me whether or not I could make it anyways. And I was like, yeah, I'm making it. I had told myself I was at least making the CFL since I was a little kid, like even before I started playing football. So I knew I was going to play in the CFL. And he says to me, are you going to play in the NFL? And he's just said it like that. I'm like, this guy is asking me if I'm going to play in the NFL, which has never happened at this university before. And to me, that gave me this, bam, I'm going to do it. And then when I got invited after people had seen my tape, this is going to happen. This is going to happen to me. I just have to keep trying. I just have to be the hardest worker. I just have to keep going. And so I got invited to the NFL Combine, and things went really well. I actually got the flu right before I went, so I did lose a bit of weight. and I went in at 280 instead of 295, which would have been more ideal. And I didn't run as fast as I knew I could have, but I did have I just looked back the other day and I had the best vertical leap, which is good for leg explosivity and strength.
At 6'6".
Yeah. And no, I had the best vertical leap for my position.
Okay.
So, vertical leap, long jump, or broad jump, and that sort of stuff, and it went really well.
As an offensive lineman.
Offensive lineman.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm picturing some offensive linemen.
Exactly. Yeah, they're like 12-inch vertical.
I'm not seeing them jumping very high.
For the most part, the competition.
I see them more them jumping and doing a belly flop kind of thing. Yeah.
So to be athletic, to come from completely off the radar for some of these teams showed interest, because some of these teams love finding those diamonds in the rough, those people that no one had ever heard of. They can get them in the late round or even in a free agent.
Get you
cheaper for sure, and they can at least bring you into training camp to hold a bag and that sort of stuff. And that's sort of how I knew I was going to fit in. I had to find my spot, right? It's all about timing, for sure. It really is, and a lot of things, and especially in NFL football, because there's so many variables happening in an NFL team that there are so many places where you can find to fit in at the right time. So the draft came and went, and I didn't get drafted. I got a phone call from the Houston Oilers in the 5th round saying, we're going to take you in the 5th round. I'm like, wow, it's all happening. This is unbelievable. Sitting there watching on TV in a room full of football players and my coaches and stuff. 5th round comes and goes. They did not take me. 6th round, 7th round, nothing. And there's only 7 rounds, and I'm like, well, I don't even know what to do now. And then, but the phone rang, and it was the Detroit Lions, and they were like, we'd love to have you on the team. And they offered me, they're known for not paying money to unrestricted free agents, especially rookies. And they offered me $10,000, and I'm like, well, that's amazing. Okay, I'm going to do that. And so I go to the rookie camp. Here's a quick story I want to tell you. So I go to the rookie camp. It's for it's actually right after my convocation at Bishop's University. I go to this camp, and it's for rookies or people who are new to the team, which I didn't know. I thought it was just for rookies. And so we do the camp. We all get in this shuttle bus, and then here we are, stinking. And I'm sitting beside this guy called Zephros Moss, and he was 6'8", 350 pounds. And here I am knowing that they don't normally give out big bonuses anyways to people who are unrestricted free agents or who should be at that camp. And I'm kind of bragging that I got $10,000. And the way they gave it to me is they walked around the change room with envelopes, and they threw them in into your stall before. And so here, right before I went to practice, I'm like, oh, it's a $10,000 check. And coming from university, that's amazing, right? And so I kind of wanted to brag about it after practice. And I'm sitting beside Zephros, and I go, I got my check, $10,000. Did you get yours? He goes, yep. I said, how much was yours for? I figured he'd say $5,000. He goes, $1 million. I'm like, what? He's like, $1 million. I'm like, what? He was like the Bubba Gump guy, man. He was like, it's from the Southern United States.
I can totally picture this yet.
And he goes, they just threw it in my locker, $1 million. They threw a $1 million check in his locker. He showed up the next day in a Corvette. And but that's that's the nature of the NFL.
He was new to the team.
He wasn't new to the team. He had signed as a free agent, not a rookie.
Not an unrestricted
kid
coming out of university. Yeah. What'd you do with that $10,000 check?
I bought a Jeep. For sure. And so I went to training camp. Training camp goes really well. I was so over prepared there. I went to a place in Ann Arbor, Michigan called Dr. Ping's House of Pain, where we lived and breathed football for 3 weeks before training camp. We did martial arts where we would literally hit each other. My forearms were so indestructible at that point from black belts just smashing on my forearms. And it just gave me this huge advantage in hand-to-hand combat and football. And things went really well. I'd always been really good at pass blocking and that sort of thing. And that's one of the things that you're sort of judged on in training camp, because you do these one-on-ones all time, and people are so interested in them because they usually turn into fist fights and stuff. And I was very physical, very tough, and I would get into fights with people on my own position. And I knew this Canadian coming in, that was my thing, is just be the toughest guy out there. Training camp is hard. Nobody wants to be there. It's all day long. It's physical. It's brutal. It's tough. And I knew if I could be the spark and I could just keep things going on a different level. And that's what happened. I mean, Barry Sanders called me the Canadian TKO. I had a practice canceled one time because I was showing so much enthusiasm. Halfway through the practice, the head coach, Wayne Fonts, comes over yelling and screaming, excited. He goes, that's how we want to play around here. Take the rest of the practice off. And everybody runs in, and I was all their best friend and everything. And as it turns out, I said, you got to get in where you fit in, right? And they had a left tackle called Lomas Brown who is maybe even in the Hall of Fame. He was an amazing football player, and he held out for training camp. He was at later stages of his career, so he was holding out for training camp so he wouldn't have to go through all that.
Yeah.
And I was basically taking his position. Here I thought I was making this team because I was starting preseason games, playing every snap, every drill in practice. I'm like, I'm the man. I've made this team as their starting or the first backup for sure. There's no way I'm not. And then obviously he signs with the team, and they cut the people, and I went home. And I went home, and I knew I could play at that level. And I'd been picked in the first round by the BC Lions. And the BC Lions were calling me, and they're like, yeah, you've been released. They actually called me before I was released, which was crazy because there's a little bit of collusion there. I mean, teams know what's going on. They're all coaches and behind the scenes. So they'd called me before and said, you're going to be released. I'm like, I don't think so, man. I think you're wrong.
I'm playing awesome. Don't you know? Like, the guys are loving me here. Yeah, and then they're like, did you not know about the guy waiting, holding off,
you don't know about Lomas Brown?
letting you take the beating, and then he'll walk in? Yeah.
Which I also had, and I had a picture of Lomas Brown in my room in university. I could talk back about that. It was a dream board I'd made. But I'll finish this story here. And so I go home, and BC Lions are calling, and I'm like, no, listen, I can do this. I'm going to play. And it got so like days ticked by, and I'm like, well, no one's calling from the NFL. Why are they not calling? I don't understand. Like, I could fit in there somewhere for sure. There's 30 teams. And my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, we were driving to the OAC for a workout, and I'm going through all this, and she pulls over, and she pulled over right where the lighthouse is there.
Yeah, totally, right by the museum.
Yeah, right by the museum, and she goes, listen, okay, you told me right now you did really well in training camp. A team is going to call. You can't go to the BC Lions. We're just going to wait. I went, all right. That's a good decision. I'll never forget that. And we both talk about that all the time because it was her decision. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to give up on this NFL thing. It's just not happening. It's been a few weeks, the whole bit. And she's like, no, listen, you know what you're capable of. You've made this promise, this dream. It's going to happen.
Finish it.
Yeah, it's going to happen. And so we went and worked out, get back from the workout, and there's a message on the answering machine from the Miami Dolphins. And they say, we really like what we saw, in Detroit. We've actually been looking for you for a few weeks. Apparently, anyways, they didn't know how to contact me.
They didn't have social media the same way they do now.
No, it's crazy, right? And what happened back then is instead of cutting people in that situation they wanted on your team, they would hide you, they would cut you, and they would pay you a job to do something else in the community, but you would still be there in case they wanted you. Like, that happened. It was rampant. It was everywhere. So they figured their first impulse was to look for me in that community.
Right.
Like, they had the scout when I got there was finally, you don't know how long I've been looking for you. I'm like, what? Really? This is crazy. And I go and do the workout for the Miami Dolphins, and the date, so this is part of the craziness, is October 30th, 1995. It was 10 years to the day that my big brother Bill died. It was 10 years to the day that I made that promise, that I went and did the workout with the Miami Dolphins. And that's that's a few things in that message, is that there's crazy things happening that we can't understand until they happen and we look back on them. And that it was 10 years.
Did you know getting up that morning that it had been 10 years?
I did not know. No, I did not know. I only found out years later when I started telling the story. And I knew it was a similar time of year, and I didn't even realize it was 10 years to the day. I knew roughly about it, and I knew I'd just, it'd been a long time. And people talk about 10 years all the time, and if there's
10 years is a really big milestone, I think.
It is
for so many things.
Yeah, it is, and it's if you want something bad enough, there's going to be days, months, years where it doesn't seem to be going your way, right? And it's within you to decide if that's what you want, and if it is, then you keep going in that direction, because 10 years. The world can flip around. Everything can change, right? I went from this skinny, tall kid in Blackburn Hamlet, going to football schools where no one had ever done something before, to just believing in myself, and to looking outward and finding the people who also believed in me and who could help me, and taking the advice that made sense to me, and failing and learning from the failures, but never giving up, and continuing to push and move myself in that direction. And so here it is, 10 years to the day. And I go out, I do the workout. I'm working out in front of like Don Shula, Mean Joe Green, Joe Theismann was there. Joe Namath was there. It was like the most surreal experience. And it was actually those three guys watching me and this other guy I was doing these drills against, and we're doing these drills, and you know, I'm just giving it everything I got, and it was so emotional, and it was just at that moment. And I've talked to people like Henry Burris about moments in their life where, like when he was in overtime, you know, in the Grey Cup and that sort of stuff, and they're like, were you nervous, were you excited? And there's this moment when you've put everything you got into something where you lose that nervousness, and everything just feels good, and it just feels right, and you're just happy. I was just happy to be in that environment, and things, they just went really well. And it was over, and you know, everyone's smiling, and I talked about this when I realized that my brother passed away, that everyone, you just feel it. It's in the air. Something's going your way finally. And the coach says, yeah, all right, Mark, why don't you go sit down inside? Somebody will be in to talk to you in a moment. And like, you know, I don't know why he wasn't the guy to tell me or anything, but I went inside. I sat in this, you know, big empty room, and I'm still trying to catch my breath, and there's just the happiness, and you know, sweaty, and almost immediately a door at the other side of the room opens up, and this familiar looking guy walks in, and I'd never seen this person in real life before, and he walks right over to me, big smile, and he goes, "Hi Mark, I'm Dan Marino. I'm here to tell you made the team." And it was just so surreal and unbelievable that here's Dan Marino telling me, like, why is it Dan, you know, the whole bit. And it was like, it was a dream come true, and it happened that day.
Okay, what was the jersey that you were wearing?
It was the Dan Marino jersey that my brother bought me. Yeah. And when we set this goal, we had this conversation about someday that it was watching Dan Marino in the Super Bowl, and here I am. He's the guy. We became, you know, kind of buddies that season for sure. And it was just, I don't know, like, how else can you explain that there's more to life than what meets the eye, than a story like that, right? Like, it's people who I tell the story to are like, well, you know, it's ignorant if you don't believe in something greater than what we see after that story. And I've told that story many, many times, and I would say a large percentage of the time I've told it, not a large percentage, I say the opposite, a small percentage of the time, something weird has happened as I've told the story. I've been in like the Chimo Inn. I gave a speech to a leadership conference one time, and I was telling the story, and it was on my brother's birthday. It was February 21st. And as at the start of the story, when people don't know if he's passed away or not, I say, and today's my brother's birthday. And as I said that, a picture on the wall crashes to the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. And I didn't continue on. I just said, at the end of the story, wow, I'll tell you why that's crazy. And then, so it gets to the end of the story, and I go, do you guys remember when I said it was my brother's birthday and the picture fell off the wall? And the guy in the front row goes, "Mister, the pictures on both sides of the room fell down." So as I told that, two pictures who had been mounted to the wall or whatever, you know, pulled out of the wall and hit the ground like a ghost movie, man. It was crazy. And there's been others, and it's just mind-blowing. It's
powerful, but for me, it's the man walking in to be able to tell you all this. It's so full circle. Yeah. It's truly remarkable. Mm-hmm. You go on to play there's a couple games there. Yeah. You have a CFL career that you come back and play the CFL. Yeah. I'm looking at the clock and I'm going, okay, I want to because there was so much. This was kind of, I mean, and you've gone on, you're in comedy, you got a job as a firefighter. Like, I mean, there's a lot that goes on. When you look at your life, though, this was the building block to everything that you stand for, everything you want your children. I mean, like, I look at as a father, how they probably know this story like the back of their hand, right? Yeah. Like, this is the commitment, this is the personality, the personality traits.
Yeah. So it's funny because they don't see the hard work and the struggle, but they see the years of, you know, being unsuccessful and then being successful. So I think they're caught up in that. I can go for years without trying or being successful at something, which is fine. Yeah. You know, I want them to enjoy.
Dad, I'm going to be really good at playing this video game, and then I'm going to make my own video game. Like,
yeah.
There's a different set. Yeah. There's a different way of thinking about things, right?
Yeah. Well, you hit it on the head when you said you sort of, it was the building blocks, because it's a process. It's not anyone is born with these gifts. People are born with gifts for sure, and then you have to learn to use your gifts or move in that direction. But it's a process. It's learning that nothing is attained without massive amounts of failure. And it's standing on the shoulders of that failure that we learn to be successful. And I mentioned it earlier about people we envision as someone who's never had anything go wrong. I guarantee if you talk to Sidney Crosby, that his life is in his head filled with failure, and it's all taking that failure and improving on it and getting better and moving in that direction. And that's what it's all about. It's when you learn to be successful at one thing, then it's applicable in everything, for sure. And after that, I mean, I always say I had this one goal, but I had a bunch of goals. That letter had a lot going on in it. And a lot of it was, strangely enough, about comedy, and I wanted to be a firefighter, and those things all came true afterwards.
Did you use the same failure? I mean, I'm sure that there's been sets of being up at Yuck Yucks or doing your comedy where you're like, that was a fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like, that was crickets on that joke. Like, how do you take the same type of training that you did for football and use it towards your comedy and your writing and saying, this is going to work, this isn't going to work?
It's different. Being on stage and being the one person in the spotlight is a lot more like being sort of the quarterback. And so it is different because it's now, and it's everyone can see. When I was a offensive lineman, I knew people could see, because people can see. There's always cameras on you, and you're always watching it afterwards with a coach. So you're always on the spotlight. But it is exactly the same. You build it. You have your goals, your dreams. You got to find things, the steps that it's going to take you to the next level, right? And it's not always as it seems. And when you don't know, ask somebody who does, okay? So that's just part of my podcasting life, is getting people on who I'm interested in, and I'm interested in the things that they've become successful at, for sure. And that's is what has changed my life, and is what has sort of accelerated other things in my life, as far as like the comedy. For sure, I'll have comedians who have been comedians for 20, 30 years on the road, and they're going to tell me, they're going to synopsis it down to like what makes them successful in 30 years. And here I'm learning that in a 1 hour conversation. And that's real. That's real. That's something I can use tomorrow, and I can use, today. And that's the power of learning from people who have been there and done that is irreplaceable.
Were you always funny?
Definitely always a class clown.
Is it one-liners? Like class clown, one-liners, waiting for the right moment?
When I was a kid, definitely one-liners. All one-liners. And so what I sort of evolving to now in my comedy career, I've been doing comedy for 3 years, and it started off with one-liners. Okay, one-liners I'd written down for years, the whole bit. And I've met through conversations people who like Daryl Lennox, who's been a comedian for 20 years, and Mike McDonald, who was on my podcast, and to them, they've been there so long that it's not necessary. It's about making people laugh first, but it's also about, and as Mike McDonald would say, shining the light on the audience and giving them something more than they had when before they got there. And so for me, I want to become more of a storyteller with the one-liners in it, and entertain people, make them happy, but send them home with a message that's going to sort of change their mind and inspire them to be a better person, to be a better you, right? And it's weird because I come from the world of sports, and taking it into comedy, it's not. A lot of people think, you got to be competitive. You got to be better than the next comedian out there, and which is completely detrimental to the whole industry. Mm-hmm. You got to be a better you. You can't go out there and say, I'm going to get more laughs than that person. And even when you go to a contest, you don't try and be funnier than someone else who's been on. Be your funniest self, and then that's what's going to make everything better and make you better too, for sure. And you can get sick by trying to be better than the person beside you.
With everything.
Yeah.
Are you funny at the fire station? Like.
No. People are always. Yeah. I'm more of a listener. I like to. I mean, if I can think of something funny to say, but there's people who are way funnier than me, right? And it's the ability to bring it together and stand on stage and stare at people.
It's in the different audience. To be funny with a group of guys and have some fun, but it's different to stand in front of an audience and. I can't even imagine. It's
crazy. My best stories, comedy stories, have come from the fire station, and people just telling these stories, and they don't realize that that's a world-class story.
Yeah, I'm going to use that.
I have two great stories that and then you got to kind of beef it up a bit and throw in some punchlines and invent a few things, because the best comedy is based on truth.
Yes.
So if you can tell a true story and have it funny, then that's amazing. And that's what people are always like. I thought you'd be funnier, or I thought I can't wait to work with you. It's gonna be a great funny day. Like I'm always telling jokes and stuff.
Is there pressure then that you feel like people are expecting you to be funny? Like I had no expectation of you being funny in here, but do you feel sometimes like your people are having you over because they want that? Hey, the funny guy's coming over.
Well, anytime I go out with like my wife and like her friends, she's always like, "You got to be on." They're expecting a comedian, and I'm like, "Well, that's like 1950s."
You know what I do when I do with Tony? I'm like, "You got to scale back." Like he'll know, like certain wherever event we are, to what level I will allow him to use his one-liners or to scale back his thought process. So he'll ask me he's like, "What kind of like, where am I today?
Yeah, that's
you know,
good.
Can
He's
I be
very
me?
funny.
Can I,
Yeah.
you know? So it's funny that your wife is like, I want you on tonight, you know? Yeah.
Well, one of my strengths as a comedian is crowd work, is talking to the crowd and making something funny out of it and relating one person over here to another person over there. So I can do that in a social situation, and I have been in situations where I just won't shut up, and it's blah, 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 blah. And if I find that alley and I'm going with it and people are enjoying it, then you can't sort of shut me up in that, especially if I've had a couple drinks, really. To be honest. And but as far as like making a one-liner or a joke, I see a lot of them now that I'm so immersed in the comedy and being around comedy a lot. I see a lot of the jokes and I don't take them because they're too easy, and I allow them for other people, right? And occasionally I will, and then I'll just shake my head like, why did I even do that? You know, like even on stage I've done that, like with crowd work, and then I'll just go, I shouldn't have, you know, like that was just too easy. But you know, it's more about listening, and that's everything in life, right? Is being a good listener. And when I'm in a fire station and we're sitting around the table in the morning or whatever, and people are telling their stories, man, I love that. And I don't necessarily want to contribute because I don't want to sort of influence the flow of anything or ruin a story. A good, you know, as you know, listening to people is obviously a huge strength for you because you're really good at this. And if you say something at the wrong time, you can ruin a story. You know what I mean? If you jump on a punchline or something like that, then you've ruined the story, right? Yeah. So you become a really good listener, and you want more. And I'll sit there and I'm like, here comes the story. It's great.
Wait for it.
Because a lot of people are just listening to their moment to talk, right? And you get a lot of that. Here's my story. Here's my version. And you're like, damn, I want to hear the end of that story.
People jump the gun. I find, absolutely. I'm trying not to jump the gun here because I'm looking at the clock, going, okay, talking about being able to talk. We've done a really good job here today.
Yeah,
I do want you to let people know, like, because there's schools, there's teachers. Like, I know you've got this program, and you're saying you're talking at like over 800 schools. Where can people find you? Like, first of all, your podcast. How many episodes are you in now? Like, I went and looked. Like, it's been great for you.
42.
Yeah,
I try to do one a week, and if a guest cancels, then I don't. Yeah. I don't just, I mean, it's fine with me. But it used to be, which I loved, is when, you know, I was in the teens or the 20s, people would email me or message me, like, where's your podcast this week, right? But now that there's 43, they can always go back. And I do occasionally get you saying one, hey, you didn't put one out last week or whatever. And
so that's good, though. People are going. And it's nice. And you're trying to be able to kind of to build that. So it's called the Hatfield Trip.
Yeah.
If you're looking for more information on that, that's on iTunes. And there's always a funny cover that you have for each podcast, like with that person.
Well,
I think I'm on a swing.
Yes, yours is one of the best.
And I think you tried to replicate it with Tony,
and
it didn't.
And it was winter.
And I'm like, what were you thinking? So you can find that, and then the comedy. Where can people find you for more information there?
Yucks, for sure. I have a weekly show there from October to April. It's been 2 seasons. It's every Friday night at 7, and it's gone really well too. It's almost sold out every week. So.
Okay, do you have hours at the fire station? I'm looking at your schedule.
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
you're still.
Occasionally I miss a Friday
shift
night.
Or two? Yeah.
No, not a shift. I go to the shifts.
Yeah.
The fire station's first for family, and then fire stations, primary, and then if I'm available, then I go to Yucks, which is most 3 out of 4 weeks, which is great. This summer we're about to go. The family's about to go on a road trip to the Grand Canyon. I also vlog too. I have the Hatfield Trip YouTube channel, and we're gonna be vlogging about that.
Okay, this is like the Griswolds.
This is totally like the Griswolds,
you've rented. Sure. There's an RV and a couple of teenage boys.
Yes.
And
3 boys, 2 teenagers, and it's going to be fun. Yeah, we're going to, and we're all into it. So everyone's sort of got their multimedia pass. They all want to be part of it. Someone's going to be making the GoPro. Someone's going to be working the drone. Oh my God, this
is like a full-on trip.
So,
and people, that's going to be the Hatfield Trip.
Yes. Yeah.
For the actual.
On YouTube.
Okay, when do you leave?
Day after school ends, so June 27th. Actually, the whole Hatfield Trip is based on Field Trip, the end of Hatfield, and everyone loves the Field Trip. It started a few years ago when we were going to Costa Rica, and we were like, let's do this. And we did some of it, and just got a little overwhelming because the kids were a bit too young to help, and they needed more attention than me, editing videos. So then it became the podcast, and then it became the YouTube channel. So
I think this is going to be a hit. This cross country in an RV with the family. That's going to be awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This was really nice. It's nice to switch the roles too. I think we'll just have more conversations. And of course, you can find more of the Hatfield Trip on iTunes, and then information on Yucks available as well. There you have it, episode 17 of Living Your Life with Leanne Lang.